before I forget. There you go. So you should have got something popped up on your screen now to say it's been recorded. So thank you and welcome to this session on party walls and building surveys from Stephen Way, who has been one of our admins in the Surveyor Hub. And thank you, Stephen, because I know you're sounding a bit Barry White today, aren't you?
Yeah.
So we'll see how we go, and you just take your time. Do you want to introduce yourself, Stephen, a bit about your background, or have you got that in some slides?
No, I'll just start. I'm Chartered Building Surveyor, qualified in 1992. My specialisms are residential surveys, party wall work, and expert witness work. Largely that involved is related to the residential survey work. I can be poacher turned gamekeeper, I'm afraid. I also deal with a bit of building and construction dispute issues. Down in Kent, I've got an office here in Hythe, which is near Folkestone, another one in Chislehurst, so we cover South East London and Kent, and I can see there's a few other Kent surveyors flag themselves up in the meeting chat, so perhaps we catch up at some point. In Kent, I'm the chair of the faculty of the Party Wall Surveyors, and I chair the Paramus and Thisbe Society, which is the learning society for party wall surveyors. I'm not going to tell you how to be a party wall surveyor, but if you do want to enter those sort of shark-infested waters, get in touch separately, and we can have a conversation about that.
So can I just say, did you pronounce it Paramus and Thisbe Club? Because I thought it was Pyramus and Thisbe Club.
Well, Marion, as you know, when two surveyors get together, it's known as a dispute. So
no, we don't fall out, do we?
But we could settle on P&T.
P&T, that'll do. Cool. Okay, then. So you've got hold of the controls, so you can get going. I'll just admit any late stragglers. If you haven't said hello, do continue to say hello and let us know where you are. And that everything continues to work. And I'll turn my camera off. I'm juggling tea time, and my daughter's decided to wrap Christmas presents for some reason. Given we don't have Christmas presents, that is a worry. So I will be hovering in the background, but we'll go through some chat, and good to go. I'll leave you to it, Stephen.
Okay. As Marion said, I have been suffering with a bit of a sore throat over the weekend, so I am channeling my Barry White and my cough medicines. So, hopefully we can run through this reasonably easily. It's going to be about an hour, I suppose, might be a bit less. If there are any questions, pop them in the chat as we go, and we'll pick those up. And really, it's about how alert to the Party Wall Act we need to be during our building surveys. Let me see if I can get these slides running. There we are. So within that, I'm going to include sort of level 2, level 3 surveys. What I'm not going to be doing is telling you the advice to give. I'm going to point you towards the things that you might need to report on that might affect your inspection, and the things that you really ought to be looking at. I can see down the list of surveyors across the screen and in the chat that I know there's a few people there who have party wall experience. I think Marion might have put a poll together to see what experience people have. But this is really being presented from a building surveying perspective and not a party wall surveyor's perspective. So it is highly likely that if you know things about the Party Wall Act, you'll know more than I'm going to tell you now. And of course, it's all about helping our clients make an informed decision. And as part of that, I'm assuming that our clients have advised us generally of what their future plans might be. Are they proposing an extension? Are they proposing a loft conversion, etc.? So we'll start with a very brief précis of the Party Wall Act. Now, the Party Wall Act is a relatively recent piece of legislation from 1996. Before that, party walls were essentially dealt with in London under the London Building Act, and in a small area of Bristol for some reason, but nowhere else in the country. In London, the legislation goes back to the 10th century. the Party Wall Act introduced nationally in 1996, and I think it's fair to say it has taken some time to filter out of London. And we know from our practice here in Kent that instructions are really increasing. It's taken 25 years or so for the Party Wall Act really to start to have teeth outside of London, perhaps because lots of former London residents who were familiar with the Act have moved out. It is becoming more relied upon to settle or start disputes. It deals with neighbours and their castles. It is increasingly litigious. Those disputes can be devastatingly expensive and out of all proportion to the issues at hand. So as some of you may remember earlier in the year, this dispute, they had an enormous falling out about the position of their dormer loft extension. And yeah, the headline says it all. They sued their neighbour. They spent 130,000 on legals and they failed, and they were always going to fail because the Party Wall Act granted them the rights to do that. And that is because next screen, the Party Wall Act is what is known as a permissive act, and that means that it allows somebody to do something. And it cannot be used to prevent somebody from doing something if they are exercising the rights that they are allowed to do. And because it's a permissive act, in other words, it's going to allow you to do something in the future, it's not easy to use it retrospectively. So if you find a situation where somebody comes to sell their property, they've got an extension, they didn't get a Party Wall award, and they say, right, I need to get this authorised now, you simply can't do it. As a piece of legislation, it is somewhat misunderstood by homeowners and surveyors in some respects. And there are always two parties to this. There's a building owner, and that's the person who's doing the work. And there's the adjoining owner, and that's the person next to the work. And there might be a number of adjoining owners. So what sort of rights does a building owner have? So firstly, they can build up to, or they can build astride with consent to the line of junction. That's the boundary between the properties. Now, importantly, and you'll see it repeated several times, the Party Wall Act does not resolve boundary disputes, and it does not establish the location of a boundary, but it might be helpful in the future were such a dispute to develop. It allows very extensive works to be undertaken on an existing party wall or an existing party structure, and it allows excavation within 3 meters or 6 meters of a neighbouring structure. So of course, what is a party wall? At its simplest, it is a wall that divides the buildings or properties of two people. You can see here now, if I do this right, I should be able to put a pointer on, laser pointer, there we are. This is sort of the traditional view of a party wall, the wall between two houses, but it could also be a wall which doesn't divide two buildings, but is built astride the boundary and forms the side of a house. And a party wall will be party to its full height and to its full depth. It does not need the building to be built against it. I make a note here, the boundary line is commonly, but it doesn't have to be in the middle of the wall. It could be anywhere within that wall. Again, I repeat, this Party Wall Act does not resolve boundary disputes. And there are some slight oddities. A previous wall can become a party wall if it is built against. So this situation here, where a garage is built against a part of a neighbouring wall, means that this part of the wall, which is shown as brickwork here, becomes a party wall. This bit doesn't. And the benefit of the shortcoming of this being a party wall is that both of the parties have acquired rights over it. And so one of the things you should bear in mind here is proportionality. A carport or a lean-to versus a garage. It's, in my view, a lightweight lean-to polycarbonate roof built onto a neighbour's wall would be insufficient to elevate the status of the enclosed wall to a party wall. An extension or a garage built against it probably is sufficient. And the other thing to remember is that this does not always deal with party walls, it deals with party structures. And that can be the floor between flats in a block of flats. It could be an internal wall between a leasehold interest and a freehold interest. So some caution is needed. Garden walls. Garden walls are referred to as party fence walls. And the Act deals with walls, but it does not deal with fences. And as with the other walls, the boundary does not have to go through the centre line of the wall. It just has to go through it. So, and a wall that's built wholly on one side is not party, even if the footing projects across onto a neighbouring piece of land. And there's my favourite note again, it's not a boundary dispute resolution. Garden walls are a source of common neighbourly dispute. Everything's lovely all the time, they're standing up and look beautiful. Everything's horrendous when they fall over, go into disrepair and cost £10,000 to resolve. And then there's the excavation thing. Now, this is a common area of misunderstanding. The first thing here is that there's this reference to 3 meters, and this is excavation within 3 meters of a neighbouring property and to a position that is, or to a depth that is deeper than the bottom of the neighbouring foundations. It is not building within 3 meters, which is a common misconception amongst the public. I've included there the 6 meter provision. That's unusual. If you were to excavate sufficiently deep that you would excavate through a line struck at 45 degrees from the bottom of the foundation, then a notice would be necessary. That may include piling. It could include substantial basements. Piling generally is notifiable, but screw piling may not be, because it is technically not excavation. But as we started, there are surveyors who would disagree with me there, and there's a good reason then. The collective name for party wall surveyors is a disagreement. So these are a few things that the Party Wall Act does not do. It doesn't identify the boundary, it doesn't resolve a boundary dispute, and it doesn't prevent neighbourly disputes. In fact, it probably provides a structure for neighbours to have the dispute they always wanted to in some cases. So what can a building owner actually do? They can build to the line of junction. With written consent, they can build a wall astride the line of junction. Now, importantly, that would become a party wall, and again, both parties can gain rights on a party wall, and that would mean that a neighbour could make future use of that wall, subject to various compensation provisions. A neighbour can place projecting footings and foundations as necessary on the adjoining owner's land. Well, that's quite a big right. It actually grants you the right to excavate your neighbour's ground to put a foundation or a footing in. There will always be a dispute as to whether it's necessary or otherwise, but that's something for another day. The principal rights, the big rights, if you like, are the rights over a party wall. So underpin, thicken. I won't read all of these, but underpin, thicken, or raise a party wall. Make good, repair, or demolish and rebuild. And that really does mean demolish. So if the wall is between two buildings is of insufficient strength or is in a state of disrepair, you can dismantle that wall and reconstruct it. There are very few cases where that will have been necessary. You can cut away from party walls. You can cut away chimney breasts. You can cut into party walls. Notably, they're cutting into a party wall for inserting a DPC. So if there's a recommendation for injecting a chemical damp-proof course, that could be notifiable. You can take down garden walls, party fence walls, rebuild them as party walls. You can expose the party wall. Now that is occasionally necessary when attic conversions are created. But they are a range of really quite big rights that you need to be aware of. And then there's the excavation issue. I won't rehearse that. I ran through that just now. And Section 8 of the Act grants a right of access. Now, that is a proper and full right of access, not a only if the court allows you to. So providing a party wall process has been followed, notices served, awards entered into, there is a right of access. Little more to say about the Act itself. So how does all of that translate into our building surveys? Well, we all know that when we arrive at our property, that we're looking at, our surveyor's antenna are twitching. The moment we arrive, we're walking down the path and we're looking at the fences, we're looking at the front elevation, we're making assessments. And we should also be making assessments of the properties on either side. And we are going to have to think about the property we're looking at, alterations, extensions, loft conversions, basements, perhaps necessary repairs, outbuildings, garden rooms, etc. So this is a property in Greenwich. And as I arrive at the property, that is what I see. And the surveyor's antenna and the red flag is this area here, which is the house next door. And this is a light well that none of the neighbouring properties have. And that means that this property has constructed a basement, and whenever there's a basement, there's a party wall agreement. So we know that that there should have been documentation between agreements between these parties, and that means we should be beginning to ask the vendor here of whether any documents are available, and perhaps try and gain a bit of history if we can. And we certainly need to be flagging that to our clients and their legal advisors. Yeah, that's the little arrow there. And so this is the same property, but round the back. And this is a little bit like party wall showtime, and is not uncommon for, certainly in South London, to find these very attractive Victorian terrace houses have been supremely overdeveloped at the rear. So the first thing we can see is this extension on the subject property. And that goes from a boundary to boundary. So we have a wall here and a wall here. Now our query immediately is, who built those walls? Are they on the boundary? Are they not? We know that we can't use this to determine the precise position of the boundary, but we should be thinking about that. And the reason that we need to be thinking about that is because these other extensions, left and right, will have enclosed on these walls. They may have built this wall. This property may have had a separate wall built against it, in which case, how is this junction weathered, etc. And were the right notices served, were there awards served, etc. But there are some other party wall issues here. There's this extension over here. There's this extension here, which encloses on this. There's this new garden wall, which may or may not be in the middle of this wall. And there's a skylight up here suggesting that there's been a loft conversion next door. So plenty for us to get our sort of thoughts into and considering what documentation should have been provided. But this is the property that kept on giving, because where the extension had got, the back had gone from side to side, they'd left a little light well here between the rear addition and the boundary wall. Now my clients wanted to infill that. They wanted to take down this lightweight construction, come across here. So the question we have to ask immediately is, who built this wall? Because if this wall was built by these people next door, then A, is it a party wall? Well, it probably is, because this has been enclosed upon it, but probably isn't definitely, so that would need to be confirmed. If it isn't a party wall, there's no right to use it, but equally there's no reason why the neighbours can't reach a private agreement. If it is a party wall, there is a right to use it, but Section 11 of the Party Wall Act says that where use is made of a wall constructed at a neighbour's expense, then a due proportion of the expenses incurred should be paid. So effectively that compensates this person who built the wall for the cost, for effectively 50% of the cost of building this wall, because here this owner does not have to spend money and time building this wall here. And certainly we should be flagging to our clients that kind of issue if we know that they want to infill here. So whose wall is it? Is it a party wall? Who built it? And what's it going to cost to enclose upon it? And it carried on giving this particular house. So very big chimneys and a brick parapet rising above the party wall on the roof. A parapet in really pretty poor condition. We've got a loose brickwork on the parapet, a brick loose and fallen out. The chimney itself, the pointing is pretty poor at the top. There are loose bricks. The floorings are damaged. We know the advice we're going to give and what to do about it, but who's liable for this? Well, the Party Wall Act can help us there, because these are party structures, party walls, and the Party Wall Act grants or provides a provision there for where repair works have to be done to defray the costs between the parties, and that is in such proportion as regard to the use of which each owner makes of that particular wall. Well, in this case, it's 50%. It's clearly a 50-50 usage and responsibility for the defect or want of repair. Now that all sounds lovely, but it is, of course, a dispute in the making, and it relies upon one party or the other conceding and paying up. There is, of course, nothing to stop the parties trying to agree it themselves, but my experience here is that becomes a point of dispute, because you've just moved in, you go next door and you say, my surveyor says that the parapet and the chimney are knackered. I'm going to be spending £3.5 grand putting these right, including putting the scaffold up, and you're in it for 1,600 quid. Thank you very much. So you may well need party wall surveyors to help resolve that type of dispute. It is certainly something you should be flagging to your potential clients. So again, we're still in Greenwich. We're downstairs. We're in the original basement of the subject house. This is higher. The floor level here is higher than the new basement next door. And there's some peculiarities here. The ground level in the centre was reduced 20 years ago, not by very much, but just enough that I could walk through it by just ducking under the floor joists. The client here, my client, wanted to complete a full basement conversion, a bit like next door. We've got the brick plinth around the perimeter, and we know that the house on the left of these stairs has carried out a basement conversion, and we also know from discussion with the vendors here that party wall was underpinned. So we need to understand what work was carried out and how it would affect the ability of our client to undertake similar work to this property. I'm going to leave Greenwich for a little while and move over to East Dulwich. This is a fairly typical South London scene. It's loft conversion heaven. Whether we like big black boxes or rear outriggers, I don't know, but it is good business for party wall surveyors. And here, there's been plenty of party wall work. So we have two things. This party wall has been raised, and it's been raised as a party wall. Now that means that this property here would have a right to use that wall if they wanted to carry out similar work and put a loft conversion on. Over here, I'm guessing, but this wall here was probably erected at this loft conversion's expense, and so this property would have enclosed on that and had to have compensated them for this. The situation on this side is a bit different. So this is not a party wall issue because the dormer is wholly on the neighbouring property's side. And it doesn't preclude the right of these people to raise this party wall, but it does mean that you end up with a really awkward little junction between the properties in here. Now that newspaper article that we started with, the £130,000 dispute in East Dulwich, it won't have been far from this property. I don't know precisely where it was, but that arose because instead of raising the whole of the party wall, one of the owners who built their dormer used a lightweight construction halfway across the parapet. They're quite entitled to do that, subject to the right notices. The problem in that particular case was that they almost didn't bother with notices. One party said to the other, I'm building a loft conversion. The other one said, oh, lovely, get on with it. And then the falling outs occurred. They thought there was trespasses, etc. So if you know your client is going to be doing loft conversion work, think about these various situations and advise them as necessary. We're also familiar, I think, with looking over the garden fence, usually to see if there's Japanese knotweed there, but it is also quite helpful to look over the garden fence and see how close next door's extension or new build was, because if it was within 3 meters, we should be asking and flagging a probable necessity for party wall notices to have been served, a party wall award to have been entered into. And some further common party wall issues here. Removal of chimney breast. This occurs more frequently than you might imagine. It is very definitely a party wall matter. We're cutting away from the party wall. It can introduce some issues and problems. They can be seen here. In this particular case, the party wanted to just simply dry line over that. It would look okay, but it would introduce all sorts of issues of noise separation, of acoustic separation with that open flue, etc. The other thing to think about there is what happens if the property next door takes their chimney breast away as well. Have the engineers considered whether the remaining floating chimney stack up the top is structurally satisfactory? So be very alert to that if you see removal of chimney or missing chimney breasts. Not only are we asking about structural support, we should be asking, when was it done? Should a party wall award or an agreement have been entered into? This situation, this is a rear extension. What we have here is temporary exposure of the party wall. That's notifiable. We have steel work going into the party wall, etc. So anything like that is notifiable. If you were surveying this house here, the one next door, and we're aware of that, we've got that work going on, you really should be flagging that kind of issue. These things, this is a concrete block firebrate wall in an attic space. That is notifiable under the Party Wall Act because it is in effect raising the party wall. Technically, it could be argued that that cost should be a shared expense between the parties, but it seldom is. It's usually something done quickly and easily to get a mortgage finalised. And then finally, it's garden walls. And whose wall is it anyway? And certainly in London, which is my general stomping ground, I guess probably the same elsewhere in the country, the garden walls are not necessarily astride a boundary line. Sometimes the face of the wall is the line of junction. The walls will go left or they all go right. But nothing upsets neighbours more than very expensive remedial work to garden walls, and whether they've been pushed over by neighbours or whether one side has failed to repoint it or otherwise. Certainly, we ought to be reporting that information, perhaps in more detail than we sometimes do, on our reports. and how the Party Wall Act may apply. And it may apply back to front, if you like, in so much as the neighbour may ask the new owner, our client, for a substantial contribution towards the maintenance of that wall. And if we haven't flagged that risk, then we might be in trouble. A couple of common problems here. These are the attic conversions. Here we can see the steel beam from the steel ridge beam poking through the party wall next door with a timber joist or ridge here. So there's a fire risk. Here, this is the steel beam into the party wall. It's on a steel spreader plate, which you can see here. And the issues here is that they've knocked a small hole in the brickwork, not been repaired, but also that steel spreader plate may actually prevent next door putting steelwork in the same place. And so it might affect their ability to construct a similar attic conversion, or might affect the way in which their structural engineer has to design a solution. So there's those two defects to be alert to. Don't forget, those can often be concealed behind dry lining in adjacent conversions. There was something on the hub recently about this particular issue. This is an underpinning issue if somebody's constructed a basement, and they will do very well to make sure that their side of the underpin looks beautiful. It's lovely, it's shuttered, it's exactly on the line. The problem is that on the other side, the neighbouring side, it is less easy to shutter that. And so the excavation may become a bit random, and we get this concrete overspill into next door space, which is fine until next door wish to do their own basement conversion. And at that point, this overspill has to be cut back because it's a trespass, and there are reasonably significant costs involved in doing that. So I think we would always flag that. If we know next door have undertaken a basement conversion, we flag that as a risk. This photograph I put on the hub on Friday is a bit of a teaser. And the issue here is that there is a wood burning stove. There's the flue, and there's the background ventilation. In fact, there are a couple of other vents on this wall as well. This is the flank wall. It's not a party wall. But the planning consent for this site allows this building, new building, to be built directly up and against this wall. And unfortunately, the wood burning stove and the various vents and outlets, they post-date this planning application. So they're a trespass. No matter, as I said, and unfortunately, the purchaser of this flat here has been quite pushy about the developer of this site spending his money to relocate their vents, relocate their wood burning stoves, etc. And sadly, the outcome is tough. They are trespasses. The building owner is exercising his right to build a wall. The adjoining owner in their flat should have been aware, or they should have been made aware of the development that is proposed next door and the implications of that development on their property. The relevant dates here, the planning consent was 2007 or 2009. The wood burning stove is 2015. So there's no question that any rights have been acquired. Always look at where the extract fans, the vents, and other items are on a flank wall of a property that may be built against. Where should we go next? This is just a couple of photographs of a site we're looking at in Sevenoaks, and this is kind of typical of the throw it up stuff that we have to deal with, where there are no party wall notices, and we have to come in and sort of pick the bones out of what's going on. Foundations almost literally thrown into the ground. They're over the boundary. The neighbour really didn't like this high quality piece of construction here. I know that that expanding foam like that is a primary building material in those situations, and that it will be expected to be left in such a neat and tidy finish. Sadly, because that was all next door, there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. The Party Wall Act simply won't deal with that at all. Where should we go next? So we'll nip back a little bit into Party Wall awards. So the process here will be that our Party Wall notice is served, surveyors will be appointed, and an award will be entered into. If you know that notifiable work has been undertaken, so that's work to a party wall, work on the boundary, or excavation, always ask if there was a party wall award. In an ideal world, the vendor will produce it. In a not ideal world, they will say either yes, but I've binned it, or no, I just said get on with it. If you can get a copy, do, because it has a lot of very helpful information in it, drawings, details, etc. It may also have a schedule of condition in it, which records the condition of the property when the work was undertaken. Party wall awards are very powerful documents. They grant binding rights enforceable in court to the parties. The award generally is never signed off. There is no true signing off process in the party wall process, although in practice, there'll be a final inspection, but damage could occur down the line. Quite important, the party wall award and the process, it's personal to the parties. It does not run with the property. So if you wish to enforce a party wall award against a former owner, you will have to enforce it against the former owner and not the current owner. And that will mean trying to find who that person is. As I mentioned at the beginning, party wall awards and agreements are not generally retrospective. There are some limited circumstances where that could be the case, but not very many. And what's in an award? Well, the Party Wall Act says, and I've put it there, an award may determine the right to execute any work, the time and manner of executing any work, and any other matter incidental to the dispute. Quite typically, that will be issues of timing. It may be issues of making good any damage or how a dispute will be resolved. It may have included method statements to deal with the manner of undertaking work, but there are a number of poor awards that seek to incorporate all sorts of things, which would be unenforceable. So when it goes really wrong, it really goes wrong. This is a development in Highbury. The building owner's property was here. It was a former industrial unit being demolished for housing. This house was for sale. The proposal here was to excavate for basements across the whole space. There was a party wall award for this property with the vendor, but the vendor's surveyor, the purchaser's surveyor and their solicitor did not check what that award dealt with, and simply ticked it off on a list of documents that said, is there a party wall award? The person who bought this property had no idea of a proposal to underpin this wall. And it wasn't a small underpin, it was a 2-meter underpin. And that underpinning went wrong. It went so wrong that not only did that house move, but the next 2 houses in the terrace move. It caused nearly £250,000 of the damage 18 months ago, 10 years ago, and 18 months of relocation. The purchaser, he is and was a very nice man. He's a well-known comedian, so he was able to laugh about it. He does refer to it occasionally. But should all of this risk have been reported to him by his surveyor? And I think it should have done. I think that the surveyor should have said, substantial building work next door. If there's a party wall award, let's get the agreements. Let's find out what building work is being done next door. Let's highlight what the risk to your new purchase is. So here's some of the questions to ask. Are there party wall awards? Well, hopefully yes, but there might not be. The party wall award does allow neighbours to simply agree to the work, in which case no party wall award. Agreeing to the work must be in writing. It is absolutely no good for an over the garden fence conversation on building an extension. Oh, okay, when are you doing that? Next week. Oh, okay, get on with it. That will be no good at all. It is entirely possible that the work either next door or to the property you're surveying may predate the vendors, and the documents are long past. Outside of London, the work may predate the Act, really. The party wall awards really entered the mainstream in around 1997, 1998. So older work will not be covered. And then the neighbours may simply not have bothered. And that happens far more than you might imagine. In fact, they may have deliberately not bothered. Probably their builder said to them, oh, the party wall, don't worry about that. So we have to ask ourselves, well, what are we going to do about that? Quite possibly nothing other than to flag it as an irregularity. And as I said just now, these documents are useful because they contain details of the works that were carried out. They'll contain drawings of that work. They'll often have a schedule of condition that will record defects at a given point in time. We also need to ask if there are any outstanding matters. Is the work finished? So is the neighbouring work finished, or is the work in the subject property finished? Is there any damage to be made good? Or was there any damage? If there was a basement, did cracking develop? Has that been resolved? Was it signed off by a structural engineer? Did the final construction look like the construction that was planned? Are there any as-built drawings? If compensation was expected or due, has it been paid? And are there any outstanding costs? And it's worth asking whether currently you've received, the vendor's received a party wall notice for a neighbour, or whether there's a current party wall award for work that's not yet commenced. And we always need to ask ourselves with these things, are we actually bothered? If the work was too long ago, it doesn't really impact our client's proposals. It was a minor item, cutting in a flashing, for instance, or there's no concerns associated with any of the work, then we do need to kind of triage how we're going to report that. We don't necessarily need to panic and panic our clients and over-report that. So, advice you could be giving. So do these neighbouring works affect your client's future plans? Attic conversions, what's the state of the party wall? What are the adjoining dormers like? Well, if the adjoining dormer is a lightweight timber with slate hangings, that may complicate the ability for one property, the subject property, to put another dormer in. It's certainly possible, but it becomes more difficult. Is there steelwork in the party wall? Is it in the right place? What's the bearing capacity of the party wall? Probably no problem with the brickwork, but in some parts of London, the mortar may well be weaker than you would ideally like it, has all of its capacity been taken up by the neighbouring property? If you're thinking of removing a chimney breast, as I mentioned earlier, what's happened next door? Can you support the chimney breast on gallows brackets, refer building control, etc.? If so, even if building control said yes, what's the impact on next door? With extensions, what's the ability to build up to the boundary like? What's the ability to build astride the boundary? And what's the possibility of compensation being due to a neighbour if you wanted to use their wall? Basements, well, we can do several hours on basements, but you certainly would need to be considering the impacts of any basement construction on neighbouring properties. Garden walls, well, as I mentioned earlier, that is just such a huge vein of disputes because they're just expensive to take down and replace, and then repairs on shared elements, which again I covered earlier. Some other practical issues, the party wall notices. So a conversation over the garden fence, it is not good enough. It needs to be in writing. It doesn't have to be on a proper form. It can be a letter that says, I'm going to be doing some work on the party wall, and the neighbour can say, yeah, that's fine, get on with it. But the conversation is just a one-way ticket to a dispute. It must be served by a named owner to a named adjoining owner. That there is some flexibility in the named adjoining owner, but given that these issues of personal names are ideal. An owner is somebody with a 12-month or greater interest in the property, or, and this is important, a purchaser of an interest in land under a contract for purchase. So if a contract has exchanged, then that party is entitled to a notice. As I said, the awards are, so notices and awards are personal to the parties. They do not run with the property. So they're not transferable and they're not assignable. So if the ownership changes, a new notice will be needed. And a new owner can consent to the work, or they can appoint a party wall surveyor, and they can appoint a different party wall surveyor to the existing one. It can become, I have to say, a world of hurt. Notices have a 2-month notice period, which could be reset when a new notice is served. There are costs involved in issuing notices and appointing surveyors, and going out of your way to incur the extra costs for the neighbour may not be a good way to be welcomed into the street. All of this is important because this line here, it is no notice, no act. And so all of the dispute resolution provisions within the Party Wall Act fall if there's been no notice. Party wall awards, similarly, they're personal and do not run with the part of the property. So you cannot, well, you can, but it's with difficulty enforcing an award against any new owner. And conversely, a new owner cannot use the Party Wall Act to try and remedy damage caused by a neighbour if that work was completed before they became an owner. It's really quite tricky there. So if we know there is damage to that property that needs to be resolved under a Party Wall award, it is essential that that is reported and dealt with by the legal team. The awards are not transferable or assignable, so a new award is generally needed. There is some ability to introduce a tripartite agreement that means that the old owner and the new owner are named jointly within an award, but that can be done, would need to be done pretty close to completion. And I say again, there no notice, no act, no award. It is important to recommend solicitors' input, but they very often do not understand the Party Wall Act. They're good at conveyancing, they're hopeless at party wall matters. A reasonable and practical solution is the bottom item here, for the new owner to contact the old owner's party wall surveyor, arrange for the awards simply to be reissued in new names. It's a very effective, time-efficient and cost-efficient way of dealing with it, but it must be done properly. I've covered most of these. What if there are no party wall notices? What if there is no party wall order? Flag each of those. What about the boundaries? Well, again, just remember the Party Wall Act does not deal with boundary locations. Even if there is an award that contains a drawing that says boundary, that document does not mean that is where the boundary is. It simply refers to the location of the work that's been carried out. Rights to light, people have a desire for their light. They try and use that for to delay or get in the way of their neighbours' rear extensions. Rights to light is a specialist field. It is not a party wall issue, and for residential work, it is seldom relevant, but nonetheless worth just flagging. What about their scenic view? Well, as we know, there is no right to a scenic view. Trees and planting can be difficult. If there are very attractive trees and plants in a bed near the boundary, and the neighbouring property wants to build a wall along there, there is the risk of damage to those trees or to those trees and plants. That should be dealt with within the Party Wall award, probably by means of having to replant or replace some of those plants. We've done it in the past by having them temporarily removed, managed, and then relocated. But that can be a problem. And remember, this is about neighbours, their castles, their rights, and if you like, their right to a dispute. And there are plenty of people who like a dispute. And finally, I've put here, it's that's the pun. So what, or why does this all matter? Well, it matters because the RICS Home Survey Standard says to us we have to be bothered. It tells us that we should be reporting on the future use of the property. It tells us we should be reporting on signs of possible trespass. It tells us that we should be dealing with reporting on property rights, boundary problems, repairs of party walls are specifically mentioned, party wall agreements and works in progress on adjacent land are specifically mentioned. So if we are not thinking about this, looking at stuff and reporting it, we are not meeting the RICS Home Survey Standard. My little clock there says 59 minutes and 59 seconds. So that's about an hour. That was the last slide. So if there are any questions, or if Marion's seen any crop up, fire away.
That was, I haven't seen any questions, but if you want to, those watching, if you've got any questions and you want to put them in the chat, then we can, read those out. Can you just go back to that last slide with the home survey?
Yeah. Okay, hold on.
Now I've asked you to do something tricky. There you go. So, so you've gone through the. Let me rephrase this. Do you get qualified as a party wall surveyor?
No, anybody can be a party wall surveyor.
Right. Because this is quite, this is quite specific in terms of what they want the home survey to include. So you need to make sure when you're being trained up, or catching up wherever you are in your career, that you understand the Party Wall Act and that you are reporting on it.
Yes, I mean, I think certainly an overview of the Act is important, because we're being expected to advise our clients where it may or may not apply. We don't have to go into any details or deep detail as to the application, but we should at the very least be saying, oh, there's an extension next door. There should have been a Party Wall Award. Is there one? Okay.
So it's the awareness and noticing of what's there.
I think so. I mean, I think it's how do you interpret the HSS, isn't it?
Yeah. Well.
we can get ourselves run down all sorts of holes trying to comply with that.
But what's really clear there is you do need to have a good understanding of it. And if you're doing residential home survey work like this, you need to find out. And so we've got a couple of questions. And so where can you learn more about the Party Wall Act is a question from Nino. And I guess that is that, the P&T club and the other faculty.
Yeah, so
club.
If
and also just on that, Robert Chapman's posted a link in the chat to some government documents about preventing and resolving disputes. So is that the kind of place to go, or is there, the one source to go?
So yes is the answer. That's quite a useful document. Certainly as an overview, amongst party wall surveyors, you'll always find somebody who will think it's a terrible document because it says something that's not quite right. But as far as the general public is concerned, and as far as the broad surveying field is concerned, that is not a bad document setting out what goes on. And in fact, if you look at that, you will find that I nicked some of the illustrations out of it. In terms of actually learning more about this stuff, the Faculty of Party Wall Surveyors run regular 2-day seminars and training courses. They cost something in the order of 600 or 700 quid. They're really good, and they're generally online. So that if you really wanted to get down and dirty with this, that would be the best way of approaching it, I think.
What about, because obviously we've got lots of students and not everyone who's got stacks of cash for courses. Are there any further, Johnny's asked about any further reading or textbooks that you'd recommend? Yeah,
there's plenty. There's probably a dozen or so about. The difficulty with the textbooks is that they are generally written for party wall practitioners, not for non-party wall practitioners.
Right.
You very quickly get yourself deeply into considerations of points of law. And probably that government overview document is as close to good as anything else. So
what we'll do for those watching on replay, we'll add I'll copy that and we'll add a link to it in the comments when I share it in the hub. Rob, perhaps I've missed it. A notice is not transferable, but is an award.
No.
You mentioned the property where relocation was required after somebody bought it. So you're saying no?
No. So what would have happened in that particular case? Now that was this situation here, where there was an award for this property. Everybody just simply ticked it off. Nobody bothered to look at it. The new purchaser didn't have a party wall award. Yeah, it was a complete muddle and a mess, and the award could not be transferred. I mean, in fact, in the end, we did get an award in place, and it was a very complicated piece of work. But no, the award is not transferable.
Okay. Charlie says, in a residential survey, would you ever identify a wall as definitely a party wall or recommend further investigation?
That depends. So, so you know, if a wall is dividing two houses, so if the wall between a pair of semi-detached houses is definitely a party wall. The garden wall behind a pair of semi-detached houses might be a party wall, depending on whether the line of junction follows it or the boundary line follows itself through. I would always be cautious, I think, about committing myself in a survey to whether something is definitely a party wall or definitely a garden wall owned by next door. Okay. I think we can trip ourselves up really quickly.
So likely might appears to be, yeah, okay.
Yeah, all indications are but.
Yeah, and also that's where, you know, vendor inquiries, talking to the vendor, sometimes they're a bit forthcoming and want to show you bits of paper and everything. Dan asks, where do retaining walls fall within party walls? I guess no different, it's just a retaining wall, is it?
It's yes, so exactly that. If the retaining wall is astride the line of junction or astride the boundary line, it's a party wall. That is quite important, because if it falls into disrepair, then the ability to defray the costs between the owners comes into play. But that is not necessarily a 50-50 defrayment of costs, because what the Act says is that you defray the costs in the proportion to which each party makes use of that party wall. So there's one for surveyors. Does the party whose garden is being protected from the upper land collapsing on it make more use of it than the upper party whose garden is retained by that wall?
Great.
That's why we make our money, isn't it? Just arguing about that.
Oh dear. Great question from Dave. What if the owner of a neighbouring property is not responding to a notice? Currently in the process of starting removal of a chimney breast on behalf of a client, the owner does not live at the property, and though we have sent letters, notices to their registered address, etc., nothing's happening. So, okay,
so what you should be doing there, it is all very well sending a notice to the registered address, which is on the title deed, which you've got hold of at land registry. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's actually their address. You should have posted a letter to the actual neighbouring property. The Act actually says that you can pin that notice onto the neighbouring property. If they do not respond within 14 days, then you send what is called a 10-day letter, which gives them 10 days to appoint a surveyor, because after 14 days of no response to a notice, it is deemed dissent. If they do not appoint a surveyor within 10 days, then you, or technically the building owner, the party doing the work, has to appoint a surveyor for them. That will be a binding appointment. It's called a 10-4B appointment in party wall language. And that those surveyors will agree a party wall award, even if they cannot access next door to take a schedule of condition.
Faye raises a great point, personal opinion here, but I think a lot of the issues with the party wall process is largely due to a lack of education of the public and professionals involved with using the Act. I agree. I would also say it's exactly the same with the home survey standard and everything else, because educating the public is like boiling the ocean and rounding up kittens. It's really hard. And as soon as you think you've got it, they move on and then they breed again. So it's really hard.
There are 2 or 3 points that come out of Faye's note there. And the first is that when the Party Wall Act was drafted, government was so keen not to make it a jobs for the Chartered Surveyors boys that anybody, and I do mean anybody, can be a party wall surveyor. So you could appoint your dog walker as your party wall surveyor, and there is nothing that anybody can do about that, even if they know nothing about the Act. So that is a problem. There is a lack of education of the public. We lose count of the number of times we are told my neighbour's building within 3 meters of my house, and so I need I need a party wall award. No, you don't. Only if there's excavation, or it's referred to as the Third Party Wall Act, etc., etc. So there is poor education of the public. It is not helped actually by planning authorities and building and certainly local authority building control simply not mentioning the Party Wall, or if they do, they might just say you should check whether the Party Wall Act applies. There's no guidance. Most people doing building work understand the need for planning consent, and most people doing building work understand the need for building control.
It's interesting because sometimes we go on holiday into Europe, and you can all think of it, and there's like half a building and a nice footpath, and it stops there, and you think, oh yeah, we're really great at construction in this country and everything being sorted. But you know what? I think a lot of consumers and us, get sent in all sorts of directions, and it's really confusing. And so which doesn't help anyone. So what I would say is, don't worry about educating the consumer. Just explain what you do, how you do it, the quality of what you do, and you'll get the right clients, and they'll trust you, because I think that's the key thing to everything. What's PI like on party wall work? Is it as scary as valuation work?
No, it's not scary at all, because there's no design input effectively. So what you're actually doing here is you're forming a tribunal of surveyors who prepare a document that actually has the same, effectively the same level as the district judge's directions. So, but as a tribunal of surveyors, in essence, all you are doing is taking the notices, agreeing the rights that apply, and preparing a document that grants those rights and grants the responsibilities in return for those rights. There is little in the way of design input. I have no doubt that when everybody falls out and everybody heads off to the construction tribunal, and the costs start to absolutely climb, and they are eye-watering, the costs for these sort of appeals. That every surveyor involved in a case will be lumped in and
in the line of fire, and
it is in my view, it is a relatively low risk area of work, but if it goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong.
You still got to know how to do it, haven't you? Now we've got a few people who've just jumped off because of time, so that's great. We'll just have one last question.
I've got Chris Fennessy there.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah. So if you're building by, is it 0.5 or 5 meters?
No, 0.5. So
0.5 within the boundary, would you serve a notice? It
depends. So if you're wholly on the next door's land,
you're such a surveyor. It depends.
Yeah. if you're half a metre inside the boundary, the only thing that could be notifiable would be excavation, because you're not building on the boundary and you're not building on an existing party wall. So if you're putting a new foundation in that is deeper than the bottom of the neighbouring property footing and within 3 metres of that, then yes, you have to serve a notice.
Got you.
To be honest, if you're going to bother serving a notice for adjacent excavation, you might as well serve a notice for building on the boundary and gain yourself that half a metre.
Yeah. Stephen, thank you ever so much. I really appreciate it and glad your voice held out for us all.
Yeah, it's not done too bad.
Thank you everybody for joining the webinar. If anyone's got any ideas or thoughts or would like to contribute to do some of these in the spirit of community, which is what we're all about, then do drop me a message and let me know, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you ever so much. Bye.